5. The capsule streaks through the bowels of the Earth, a comfortable football-shaped luxury pod with pneumatic shocks behind the seats to lessen discomfort during moments of intense acceleration. The armrest displays the current ETA, 2 minutes, 3 seconds. Plush vinyl surrounds massage cushions, condensation beads across curving chrome walls and tinted windows, recycled air blowing from overhead vents. Despite the inclusion of ivy trellises along the ceiling and flowering jasmine creepers above the heat ducts, the enclosed space smells stale, sweaty, governed by the sharp aroma of feet. During her first OneGov-sanctioned pruning treatments, Mrs. Halfmoon became temporarily disoriented and spent several days believing she'd turned into a chicken, Alan says. It's important we note any signs of a relapse. Really? Cosmas asks. No. She does oversee several commercial poultry farms, though. A pet project, if you will. His travel bag stowed in the side compartment, Cosmas has the shuttle to himself. He stretches, feet to the metal grate, leaning back against the vibrating neck pillow. You believed me about the chicken thing? Alan asks. There are lots of wild stories about adverse reactions. I trust you to keep me informed, Cosmas says. So yes, then? Yes. Forward momentum tapers, seat pistons absorbing the initial slowdown, foliage swaying with the shift. Cosmas stretches against the 5-point harness. Everything comes down to engineering, he thinks. Thresholds, silver bullets, leaping through vacuum chambers. Acceptable percentages become key deciding factors. How often do failures occur? How often are the failures catastrophic? Given high traffic and unlimited time, can the possibility of tube ruptures converge close enough to zero to functionally never take place? Blackness becomes a blur outside grimy windows. Steel ribs stretch farther and farther apart. The craft rides along magnets, a disc sucked through a straw to a docking port, seals engaging, clamps pushing, a rubber ring around the doors that open to a red brick underground. You're aware of Mrs. Halfmoon's sensitivities? Alan asks. I'm aware of the fact that she used to be married, Cosmas says. For 490 years to the recently deceased Carson Halfmoon, theirs was a marriage that lasted. The R&D kingpin, a champion of disruptive tech. A researcher from the years before the revolution, Halfmoon had achieved the closest thing to fame that existed in the centuries following planetary unification. His name remained a wild card linked to perception-based models of theoretical physics and game-changing neurological treatments, including the framework for now illegal thought-sharing enhancements. Illegal because of the defecation flash mobs in Wisco 5 and Wisco 4, and the 52 simultaneous pharmacy break-ins by clowns during a blizzard, and the release of a few hundred garter snakes during a Remembrance Day march, an event that resulted in several dozen skull-crushing trample deaths. Halfmoon, who had crawled out of memory, the seething man throwing glassware on the cobblestone path. He was an odd duck, Cosmas says. That's putting it lightly, Alan says. Of course, a big difference exists between being aware of a destabilizing technology and actively choosing to defy authority. Hence, the publicly available annals of history chronicling every bad idea, every governmental misstep, every logical conclusion on display for reference in OneGov pronouncements. Hence, the tags on mattresses and the statues etched into the steel of the antenna broadcast tower that floats outside Cosmas's apartment window. Hence, the 200,000-word annotated Citizen's Reference Guide that hovers just out of sight, tip of the iceberg really, ready to slide in with a finger swipe. Cosmas Halfmoon had not so much become famous as notorious, and for Cosmas, doubt creeps in as to whether he'd been a genius or simply driven, a tycoon with legions of researchers, a relentless perfectionist, a pharaoh directing his subjects, an Edison, not a Tesla. His epitaph had read, "A quiet man with above-average taste in women and cats." When he'd absorbed a gigantic dose of radiation from a failing field projector and an experimental reactor, the incident received the same level of reporting as the weather, muted, unconcerned, because the world had long since abandoned hype and sensationalist news, but people took note, and the AIs were forced to ride it out. Mass pet shavings, 1,387 nitrous oxide canisters left leaking in the Hyperloop pods on a Tuesday. Eventually, Half Moon's fusion death debacle prompted an inquiry into Glacial's culture of negligence coupled with unobserved safety protocols and a lack of equipment maintenance, ultimately leading to personnel changes and facility closures, even as the corpse continued to smolder in the toxic quarantine ward beneath the rural sanitarium outside Wisco 10 proper. Not that anyone was paying attention. Ada didn't go outside for weeks after the funeral, Ellen says. Why are we dwelling on her grief? Protracted psychosis has been known to be a catalyst for dementia. Cosmas strolls past soft-serve protein kiosks and a vice shop. Climbing the Hyperloop's brick steps to street level, stairs widen to the hub terminal. Buses and long covered stalls, taxi launch pads beneath lines of landing lanterns that twist around established maple trees, jalopies zipping past, chassis bouncing as they merge onto distant roundabouts and scatter toward the brewery and the local Unity Center, some pushing ahead to Simon Tower, the monolith that stands as if it has always been there, always brushing the sky, impossibly tall, obsidian. It brings to mind Babel from the Old Testament, Cosmas says. Managed structures reduce human impacts on everything from the water cycle to ecosystem renewal while improving energy efficiencies, Alan says. I'm aware of the benefits. The public square in front of what was once a courthouse has turned into a common use space. Bottles and solutions line the shelves of a mobile elixir stand, its jerk waiting. Smiling through tempered glass, a violinist fills the audio comm channel with the rich, classic laments of Nina, a slight vibrato accented by long, sorrowful bowings. Hops grows from the tops of poles bolted to benches made from old tires. An orange tabby cat bends to lick itself, a single hind leg in the air. The late morning crowd scampers about, nodding as they avoid each other, friendly as they go about their task lists, purple jumpsuits and blue jumpsuits. Here and there, a person drinking a tiny coffee pick-me-up before dropping the cup into a collector bin. Have you ever lied to me, Alan? Cosmas asks. I told you a fib earlier, Alan says, about a patient's delusions of chickenhood. I mean an act of genuine deception. Cosmas clicks a circular unlock icon and raises the wheel lock bar from a bike rack. The prescribed route to Mrs. Half Moon's home includes a bicycle with baskets, a path across a pedestrian bridge, and a race against the clock that already reads 10:15. Based upon human standards, I lie frequently, Alan says, as have parents and teachers and religious figures throughout recorded time. Can you elaborate? Cosmas asks. If your question relates to a moral compass, then I certainly respect your rights as an individual. You aren't inspiring confidence. Travel bag secured beneath bungee straps, Cosmas rides through streets accented by the browns and golds of branches emptying themselves onto rain gardens and prairie grass lawns, wooden lumber baron mansions, and a ring of churches standing as monuments to half-recollected dreams, belfries in tidy repair, LCD shingles strung together into shimmering screens, replaying highlights from the OneGov celebrations of the week before, Counselor Alexander speaking with clasped hands. As we make progress in the areas of living standards and infrastructure equalization, we must never forget the radical disparities of the past, she says. Standing on the cruiser's pedals, Cosmas coasts down the looping hills. Bungalows turn to apartment complexes, buildings thin, giving way to open lots. He glides past an abandoned hospital, long since overrun by weeds and bushes and a determined sprinkling of birch trees. A lumpy hill, a scarcely recognizable version of its former pristine cleanliness. Its former canyon-like walls capped by gleaming chrome, a place where purified air was once drawn through immaculate operating rooms, surgical tools set atop linen on metal trays. He remembers his grandmother groaning, eyes closed, propped in a bed next to an accordion pump, a mask over her mouth, needles in her arms. Imagine I'm planning a route for a delivery driver, Ellen says. One path takes him past the scene of a horrific accident involving people he knows but no longer interacts with. A slight detour avoids the wreckage and the emotional loss that will result. Am I lying if I act to preserve happiness and spare trauma? I'd still want to know, Cosmas says. Exercising influence over the personal narratives of your life doesn't give you more control over the larger forces at work in the universe. Nobody likes being duped. Smoke rises from the chimney of a farmhouse, and Cosmas dismounts. Walking the bike to the fence gate, he reaches over the slats and flips the latch. A familiar porch swing, a mailbox with a cardinal on the front. Mrs. Halfmoon leans on the front railing, her skin peeling like a sunburn from recent gene therapy sessions, strands of silver in her thick, dark hair that will soon return to the near black of her youth, vapor trailing from a flared-mouth ceramic coffee mug, tan glaze with brown enamel drip accents. "You've come back to me," she says.